Hello, it's been a while since I talked about interpreting in particular. But in particular, not only any kind of interpreting, it's just simultaneous interpreting. Now, of course, in simultaneous interpreting, you need to prepare yourself. How do you prepare yourself for a speech which you don't know what they will be talking about? You need to know the topic. I mean, the topic is really fundamental as to what to actually expect that will be talked about. And this one is, let's say, for example, is something related to politics. So if there is a conference, press conference, let's say, for one of the leaders about the current affairs that are happening around the world, in particular in the Middle East, you will find that you need to prepare some sort of vocabulary. And how do you do that? Of course, you read in two languages, in the English and the Arabic. Of course, I'm talking about this kind of language pairs. And I'm talking about here simultaneous interpreting. And simultaneous interpreting is, it requires your adrenaline to be, to kick off your adrenaline by when the live feed or the live press conference is starting. So what do you do here? One of the preparations is to know the geographical area where this speech is going to be in, and about the geographical area where the topic is going to be on. Let's say it's southern of Lebanon, so therefore you need to know some of these places like Shaba farms or fields and other areas there, Nabatiya or whatever. So you need to know the areas just in case the speaker talks about them. If there is an event there, a bombing there or shelling or whatever. So you need to know about these names of these places. That is one of the preparation. Another thing is to read about what's happening in that area, in particular in the past week or months prior to this conference, just in case if the speaker is going to talk about them. So also you need to be having some background information about the topic. Now on top of that, of course, you're going to say, okay, well, how do I know all the words that's going to be mentioned in the actual press conference? Well, you cannot predict what kind of vocabulary is used, terminology that's used. For example, قذائف الهاون, you would say mortars, موكب being targeted, تم استهداف موكب, for example, or revolutionary guards, الحرس الثوري, if you're talking about the resistance movement, or you're talking about the conflict epicenter, which is بؤرة الصراع. Smugglers, who are المهربين, air raids. So you need to prepare the المعارك الدائرة, ongoing battles or that are happening in the, and then maybe there will be words like التطبيع between Israel and the Arab world, which is normalization. قوات الحشد الشعبي, for example. You need to know that it means popular mobilization units. So therefore, I mean, this is also كتائب القسام, for example, القسام brigades or other kind of brigades. Battalions, كتائب, can be also can be mentioned. Also, if you're talking about the conflict that's happening, let's say in southern Lebanon, then you can be talking about also resistance and the southern suburb, الضاحية الجنوبية, which is an area. So you see, all this terminology is extremely important to prepare and to be ready for. So, I mean, I'm just going to give you some terminology that could be used. For example, Zionist entity, الكيان الصهيوني. And then you have things like التكتم عن or keeping quiet about something. or تعطيل, disrupting, or enabling, disenabling, تعطيل radar system, let's say, for example. So all these terminologies, central command, for example, القيادة المركزية, and other terms like, for example, معاقل, bombarding معاقل, shelling strongholds, إذن قصف معاقل المقاومة, let's say. So these are called resistance strongholds. These you need to know about. اقتحامات مختلفة, storming, and perhaps incursions can be also another form of usage. There is also the word نزوح, for example, which will be very expected kind of terminology, and it can be called exodus, which has got that kind of religious term to it, as opposed to the word displacement for نزوح. So, and also فتح الجبهة, الجبهة الشمالية, for example, northern front, opening the northern front. So these are all hacking the airport system, قرصنة المطار أو أنظمة المطار. And then shutting down, أسقطنا, توجيه ضربة, directing military strike against, let's say, Houthis or whatever. So, I mean, these are all very important in interpreting. If you're interpreting something, this is what you expect. And there is, of course, there will be khilafat, which are disagreements between the people who are discussing, if there is a kind of dialogue going on, or debate, or discussion going on, or talks. So this kind of preparation, basically, and then holding people accountable, meaning يتحمل المسؤولية, taking responsibility, or being accountable for their work, for their actions. And then you have, of course, تفكيك, which is dismantling. And the Israeli hostages, the prisoners, الأسرى, air raids, غارات جوية, معارك دائرة, as I said, ongoing battles. So these really, it actually, then there is the توغل القوات. This is a very common kind of term used in political translation. You need to know, or interpreting. So you need to say that troops incursion, or troop incursion, which is bilateral, let's say, bilateral or unilateral, which is أحادي الجانب أو ثنائي الجانب. So, I mean, all of these words and terminologies, you need to be prepared for them. And when they say, for example, يكبدون العدو, which is inflicting, inflicting losses on the enemy. So inflicting losses on the enemy is يكبدون العدو خسائر. Of course, you have to be careful here, because inflicting losses is something. Inflicting losses is يكبدون خسائر. So really, what has made me think is a recent expression called غلاف غزة. And here, of course, the best equivalent will be, in preparation for your simultaneous interpreting, would be shelling over Gaza Strip's borders with Israel. So that is غلاف غزة. You have to be aware of the meaning of غلاف غزة in Arabic and what it means. It means that they are shelling over the border with Israel from the Gaza Strip and not the Gaza city. See, this is the geographical element that you need to be trying to understand as well. There will be other words like atrocities, فظائع, مقومات الحياة, necessities of life that they are lacking, like for example the Gaza people. And then also there is battalion commander, قائد الكتيبة, and here قائد الكتيبة is different from كتائب القسام. كتائب القسام can be called القسام brigades. So all of these terminology, I mean, like for example, I remember somebody, one of the speakers was saying, هو حجة لنا. حجة means he is an authority. And here you can't say it's a pretext, because حجة can mean pretext. But this one is not. It means authority, expert, if you like. So really, when you come across terms, you have to know their context and how to select the best options or the best terminology in preparation for your live feed or live audiovisual material, because this kind of material is you don't know what to expect during the session. So preparing this kind of terminology, I'm just giving you examples of these terms that you need to prepare ahead of time as a simultaneous interpreter. And then you find that the words are jumping in your head while you're doing the live address or the live speech, and you don't have any problem with that. And of course you have to be a bit relaxed. You cannot just sort of stress yourself so much, but you need to be ready. The adrenaline needs to be there. But it's just only, you have to understand that the person who's speaking is just a human like you and I, but then they might be reading something that's already prepared as a speech, and they might just divert from the speech. I mean, this brings me to the UN speeches, when you have one of the presidents speaking or one of the prime ministers of a country speaking, or a king or a president, then you find them that they are reading from the paper, but they are aware there are interpreters in the booths interpreting into other languages. There are 6 languages in the UN, as we know. So when you get this press release or the speech beforehand, before you go into the booth, this speech you don't really prepare as much. You don't translate it and say, oh, well, I've got the speech, now I can go and translate it. And when this president or this king comes to the podium, I can straight away read what they said, and then I would have checked all the translation. You can't do that. That is not practical. This is not what happens in a simultaneous interpreting session. What happens is that you have to be ready, and you go ahead and listen to what they say, understand what they say, and then output in English or into Arabic, depending on which way you are actually outputting. But you need to output into one language. You cannot do bilateral or bidirectional kind of interpreting in simultaneous interpreting, because you will be confused. Your head cannot switch on and off from one language to another, unlike consecutive. In consecutive, you can be bidirectional, i.e. you can interpret from Arabic into English or English into Arabic, from language 1 to language 2, from language 2 to language 1, or language A language and B language and C language, which is A language, which is native language, your native language, which is the best language you can interpret into, and a B language is a near-native person doing that. So A language, outputting in an A language, you should carry on with that output. You cannot just go to another and start to do the opposite. That will be not a good training. I've noticed in some trainings, some simultaneous interpreting training, they give them English and Arabic at the same time, and they want to switch them and see whether they can do that. You cannot do that. You should have one direction only. Let's say a test will be from English into Arabic. That's it. You cannot actually, during that exercise or during that question or test, you do the other way. You have to have one session from Arabic to English, let's say, and another session separate with a break, a good break, let's say for 1 hour or something, so that the actual interpreter can be refreshed and can think that it's going to be from A language to B language when they are interpreting, so that they can, in the second session, switch on the other way around. So the output will be in a B language. So, I mean, it is extremely important to do that when you are training simultaneous interpreters. You cannot give them both directions in the same session. That will be unfair, and it's very, very difficult. Now, that brings me to words that are interesting to look at, like the word hujjah. Huwa hujjah. He's an authority. You can say he's an authority or he's an expert. But I would say an authority is better than an expert even. And then sometimes in a religious form, they say labbaik. And that means we're coming to answer your call. Labbaik. I don't think I've seen it in any, I tried it in Google, it says here you go. What is here you go in Google translating the word labbaik? It's very strange. But you see, of course, Google, what happens is that it collects all the, let's say, data from Google and try to come up with a translation. But that is why Uncle Google, I don't trust in this. You need to have an authority, a good reference, good dictionary. As I said before, you use monolingual dictionaries first and then understand what labbaik means, for example. Because sometimes they use it if a religious speaker is speaking and people say labbaik, for example. So this is really one of the things, and you noticed also that there is something relating to tamma man'u, or for example, one party is trying to يعني تمنع طرف يمنع آخر أو يمنع من لجمه. For example, I came across this expression. We can always say for that, to curb him. They are not trying not to curb the person or the party, or not to restrain the other party, or not to bridle the other party. Of course, restrain and curb are better options. And more restrain than curb, because I think restrain is more formal. So it's important to use all these terminology that you need to prepare beforehand when you're going to an interpreting session, and that is one of the fundamental steps to interpreting. You cannot go and interpret without having to prepare in both languages. So you listen to English channels. For example, if you are outputting into English, you watch a lot of English feeds from news channels, let's say, and you go also to the Arabic channels and you watch a lot of feed in there as well. And in your mind, you are interpreting quietly and silently. That is one of the exercises of preparing for a simultaneous interpreting session, or whether that session is a press conference, or whether that session is a live feed or a TV piece of news or item of news. I hope that you've learned something from this session today about simultaneous interpreting, and it's an exercise which I think you should go and practice as much as you can, maybe 1 day or 2 days before the event if you can. Always, if you are confident and that you have all the terminology, then you don't need to spend that many days in preparation, but you can do that, because reading, and a lot of reading is required, a lot of watching is required, audio-visually, like videos, YouTube ones, and so on. And you are trying to get their equivalent in the other language, in the language that you are outputting. And don't rely on dictionaries. At times, dictionaries do not give you the best option for a certain word, like التوغل, incursion, which will be a good one for this one. And then also معاقل. Oh, there are bastions are معاقل, but I would say strongholds are just as good, and strongholds are really mostly used in a negative way, unlike bastions, which has got a positive effect. This kind of positive negative effect of choosing the terminology, because some terms has got a negative effect and some terms have got positive effect, and it depends on the person who's going to be speaking in the speech whether they are using the positive or the negative effects. You have to be aware of that. For example, some leaders in the Arab world, they use Zionist entity, which is al-Kayan al-Sihuni. They would not say Israel, for example, because they don't believe in the state of Israel, for example. Whereas others might use the word state of Israel because they believe in that. So, you have to be careful, Dawlat Israel or al-Kayan al-Sihuni. So you see, this kind of usage is extremely also important to be aware of, because it's got some ideology behind it and preconception from the speaker, whoever the speaker is. So you need to be aware of that as well. I would say, there are many things I come across. For example, Wazir al-Kharijiyya, if it's a US foreign minister, you can't say foreign minister of US because it's called Secretary of State, for example. Yeah. Whereas in UK, they have a different expression, or they say the foreign minister, as opposed to the home to the home office. Let's say Wazarat al-Dakhliya, and foreign office Wazarat al-Kharijiyya. So this is not in a US, it's a British English. So you have to be aware of all these terminology, where they're coming from, whether they are US expression or an English expression, British expression, British English expression. The last point that I want to mention is about the word murabba sakani or murabba amni. Here we can say residential area. A residential area is murabba sakani. And you see, the word murabba is not square. You can't just say residential square, because it's not. I hope that you are learning from all these expressions, and security or safe area. So murabba amni, security area, highly tightened security area. So I think I have actually sort of given you a good terms that you need to be aware of when you are preparing. And that is really something, because you don't want to actually come across some terminology while the speech is live and then struggle to find out what is meant by يكبدون العدو خسائر فادحة, for example, inflicting high losses in the enemy's ranks, or in the enemy's troops, for example. So, this is really one of these. And then, of course, there's a word اعتداءات, which I've stopped at. And it can be attacked, it can be offensive, because offensive is اعتداء, and attack is اعتداء. So an aggression is اعتداء. So, you can always decide on which one is the best in the context that you are being interpreting, and know which one I should be using, outputting. So the outputting, of course, there was tawazun. You can use the word balance, but then you can use a more sophisticated, if you like, or more formal. Equilibrium is a better, more formal kind of term compared to the other one, which is not formal. So this is really one of those important elements that you need to be more concerned about and more prepared to do. I hope that you've learned something from today's session about simultaneous interpreting and how you prepare some of the terminology. Have a nice day.